Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe, comment what you think is coming next, and share it with someone who follows global news closely. I am Sophie Edward, and you are watching my channel, Sophie Edward. Tonight's story is dark, fast-moving, and tied directly to the world economy. Iran tried to turn a single stretch of water into leverage over every country that buys oil. The United States answered with raw military force. President Trump has now confirmed strikes that, in his words, destroyed Iran's naval headquarters and sank 9 Iranian naval ships. And he says the hunt is not over. This is not just a regional clash. It is an energy choke point, a shipping panic, and a regime under pressure that appears to be losing control of its own chain of command. It all starts with one major mistake in the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian regime has spent decades threatening that it could shut down global energy flows if it ever felt cornered. This week, that threat moved from rhetoric to action. As American bombardment continued, Iran's fractured military posture became more erratic. Instead of presenting a unified strategy, Iran signaled that separate units were making decisions on the fly, trying to find any move that could change the cost of the war. The logic was simple. If Iran could frighten shipping, slow oil traffic, and spike prices, then pressure would spread across global markets. That pressure could force outside powers to demand restraint from Washington. But there is a difference between threatening the world and controlling it. Iran tried to create a crisis at sea. The response from the United States has been designed to remove Iran's ability to do it again. To understand why this matters, you have to understand the Strait of Hormuz. It is not a symbolic waterway. It is a hard economic artery. Roughly 1/5 of global oil and a similar share of global liquefied natural gas moves through this corridor. Major Gulf producers depend on it. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and Iran itself rely on that route to reach global markets. That is why the Strait has always been Iran's trump card. It is a choke point that can be threatened even without total naval dominance. A warning, a drone, a single strike, or the fear of mines can be enough to make insurers panic and ship owners pause. When that happens, prices move before any blockade is fully real. That is the power Iran tried to activate. In the early hours of February 28th, Iran announced it was closing the Strait of Hormuz to all ships. But the first step was not a physical shutdown. It was a broadcast. A radio message telling vessels to turn around. And for a moment, the question was obvious. Would the world comply? The answer, at least at first, was no. Traffic continued. Ships still moved through the passage. The message alone did not stop the flow. Satellite tracking suggested the strait was not sealed in any meaningful way. So Iran faced a problem. If the threat was ignored, the bluff would collapse. And if the bluff collapsed, Iran would have to escalate to maintain credibility. That escalation did not begin with a clear military objective. It began with an act designed to manufacture fear. By morning, Iran attacked a tanker named Skylight, anchored off the coast of Oman. 4 sailors were reported wounded. The location and the target mattered. This was not a tanker racing through the strait under a foreign flag in the middle of peak transit. The ship had reportedly been sitting offshore for more than a week. And there was another detail that made the incident even more revealing. The vessel had been blacklisted by the United States for allegedly helping Iran evade sanctions. That strongly suggested it was linked to Iran's own network. In other words, Iran did not need to strike a foreign ship to spread panic. It could hit a vessel tied to itself and still trigger the same headlines. The goal was not tactical, the goal was psychological. The immediate strategic impact was not just in the Gulf. It was in how the world interpreted the signal. A large share of Gulf energy exports flows to Asia, including China. That makes Beijing deeply exposed to disruptions, even if it says little publicly. At the same time, Russia and China have remained notably quiet, despite being described as strategic partners of Iran. That silence is being read by many observers as a sign of distance, or at least caution. Meanwhile, markets prepared for volatility as trading reopened. OPEC discussed supply, including increases, but supply announcements do not erase shipping fear overnight. Analysts also pointed to escalation dominance. The United States can strike Iranian targets with reach and precision. Iran's options are narrower, and that imbalance may be pushing Iranian units toward impulsive moves without a coherent plan. Within hours, reports indicated shipping traffic had fallen sharply, with some estimates suggesting a drop of 50 to 70%. That is exactly the kind of disruption Iran wanted, even if it was driven by fear more than by sustained attacks. Major shipping companies began suspending or reconsidering transits through the strait. At the same time, insurers reacted in the most predictable way. They raised prices, restricted coverage, or canceled policies. The cost to insure a single trip reportedly jumped from about $250,000 to about $375,000, an overnight surge that changes the math for every operator. The result is visible on tracking maps. Tankers holding position near the southern approaches, waiting for guidance. A slowdown caused less by missiles and more by the financial machinery that keeps global shipping moving. Geography is the hidden weapon here. The Strait of Hormuz is narrow enough to be threatened even without full control. At its tightest, it is only about 21 miles wide, and the actual shipping lanes are far tighter than that. Large tankers are enormous targets. They can be hundreds of meters long. They move at speeds that are not fast in combat terms. When vessels are forced to slow or when they anchor in clusters, they become even easier to track and potentially target. That is why the threat alone can act like a blockade. You do not need to sink every ship. You only need to convince insurers and executives that one strike is enough. Iran has long understood that. This week, Iran tried to prove it. The question now is whether the United States has decided to remove the tool entirely. Bloomberg projected that in an extreme scenario, oil could spike toward $108 a barrel, far above pre-war levels around 60. Even if that number proves temporary, the direction of travel is the message. And this is where the Gulf Arab states enter the story. These countries depend on the strait to export the energy that funds their economies. Many of them host American bases, yet they have also tried to avoid becoming direct participants in the conflict. Some publicly signaled limits on the use of their airspace or facilities for strikes. Despite that, Iran has continued firing missiles and drones into the region. Now, by threatening the waterway itself, Iran is also threatening the lifeline of neighbors who are trying to stay out. That makes Iran's message harder to sell and anger easier to ignite. Iran's foreign minister has tried to frame these actions as unavoidable. His argument is that the war was imposed on Iran by the United States and Israel. He tells regional governments that if they are angry, they should direct that anger toward Washington and Jerusalem, not Tehran. He also suggests that because American forces operate from bases in the region, Iran will treat those bases as part of the battlefield. But reality on the ground is messier. Many strikes do not clearly land on military targets. Regional airports, buildings, and civilian areas have reported impacts. That is what changes public mood. People do not debate strategic theory when their city is hit and their economy is shaken. Iran wants neighbors to blame America. Instead, neighbors are increasingly blaming Iran for bringing danger to their doorstep. Then came the most alarming admission. Iran's own leadership signaled that control inside the system is breaking down. The foreign minister effectively acknowledged that military units were operating with broad instructions given in advance, and that those units were now acting with independence and isolation. That is not just a talking point. It is a description of a command structure under stress. When central leadership loses the ability to direct targets in real time, escalation becomes unpredictable. One unit hits a country Iran wants to protect. Another unit fires without coordination. And the political leadership is left explaining actions it did not authorize. This is how miscalculation spreads. It is also how wars widen without a formal decision to widen them. And it is why regional states are watching Iran's internal stability as closely as they watch American firepower. Oman became the clearest example. For the first 24 hours, Iran did not target Oman, a country known as a mediator in recent U.S.-Iran talks. That made sense. Oman had pushed for diplomacy and had maintained channels when others could not. But then Iranian drones and missiles hit Omani targets anyway. After that, the foreign minister publicly apologized and claimed the strike was not Iran's choice. That apology was not reassurance. It was evidence of chaos. And while Iran was struggling to contain the consequences, the United States was already moving against Iran's naval capacity. Satellite imagery and reporting pointed to damage at naval facilities, including a frigate seen burning at a base after a drone strike attributed to the United States and Israel. The sea domain was becoming the next battlefield. Now comes the announcement that reshapes everything. President Trump stated that U.S. forces destroyed and sank 9 Iranian naval ships, including vessels described as large and important. He also said Iran's naval headquarters was largely destroyed and that American forces were going after the rest of the fleet. Then he added a final line that landed like cold sarcasm. He said that other than that, their navy is doing very well. If these claims hold, Iran is facing the rapid collapse of its maritime power right as it tries to use the sea for leverage. But a cornered regime can still be dangerous, especially if its own units are operating without tight control. Before you go, subscribe to my channel, Sophie Edward, comment your thoughts, and share this video. Because the water is still open, the fear is still spreading, and nobody can honestly say what comes next.